My name is Pete Wallroth. I'm the CEO and founder of charity Mummy Star, and I'm delighted to welcome our friend and colleague Caroline this morning. So, Caroline, over to you.
Hello, Pete. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, my name's Caroline Leek, and I'm the director and founder of an organisation called Fruitfly Collective. And we support parents diagnosed with cancer to empower them to support their own children.
And there is another additional string to our collective bows, I think, over the last couple of years, which I think deserves rightly to be lauded in this conversation, which is parenting with cancer.org as well.
Yes. Yeah. So we have created lots of different support methods and ways that the parents can then learn how to navigate family life when they are diagnosed with cancer, and to be able to support their children with different communication tools and strategies and skills that help them as a family unit.
Well, thank you. What we're here to have a conversation about is obviously our Healthcare Professionals Awareness Week that we're doing for 2025 is all around share the care, and it's that focused around when parents are suddenly facing or have had a diagnosis of terminal cancer or metastatic cancer, first and foremost, and then facing those conversations about how to discuss death and dying, end of life, what that can look like for different families and different cultures and faiths and backgrounds, and how do we empower parents to want to have those conversations and embrace them. And then additionally, it's how within that space for the healthcare professionals that are supporting those families, how do we aid and support them to be able to feel more confident in that space? Because it is a space that we need to be more comfortable with. We need to try and break down the kind of barriers, the taboos and the avoidance that come with this area, because it's still seen as this kind of prickly area that we want to sort of jump around, and we're never quite sure how to engage those conversations, how to embrace them, and how to, more importantly, support them. So I think that brings us really neatly into your experience at Fruitfly, and in addition, in more recent years as well, to the development of the Parenting with Cancer website, and how we've been able to pull together those experiences to be able to try and open that conversation up. So I guess my question, I suppose, first of all, and there probably will be many and they'll evolve during this conversation, is when parents are approaching this kind of scenario, when they perhaps have recently had a diagnosis of metastatic cancer and perhaps prognosis isn't necessarily clear, what additional support are they able to provide for their children? How do we support and supplement that?
Well, I think the key thing really is remain honest, but be very much child-led. So some children want to know everything, some children don't. And then it is timing. So you want to have those really difficult, challenging conversations at a time when, if you're going to be starting talking about death, you don't want to do it too early for some families, because the children will be sort of living with that uncertainty or that kind of fear and anxiety for longer than necessary. So it's about trying to sort of plan it so it is always open, and communication and questions, and children can come to their parents and ask what they need to ask. But when you're going to have those final conversations about, yes, mummy is going to die, to work out when that time would be best for that family. Having said that, some families are open and right at the beginning when the parent has like 6 months left or something, and actually they work really well, because then actually the family can then start to make those memories while the parent is still quite well. But for some other families, some children, depending on the ages as well, it might not necessarily be the best time if they've got 6 months or a year or whatever, but to wait until a bit further along, until they know that death is going to be coming, within a month or something like that.
I think sometimes with these conversations, we focus very much on how are we going to construct and support the conversation with the child. And that sometimes can be at the cost of, are we actually ready to talk about it ourselves? Because the very opening of the conversation with the child is you confirming to yourself that some level of reluctant acceptance that actually, if I start talking about this, that means that I'm confirming to myself this is going to happen. There's now finality to my life. And this is a conversation that needs to be had. For me to be in my healthiest place to have it, I need to be ready. And
Yeah.
and I think your point there, you said it a few times, like, when is the best time? And it's that question that anybody else, like, well, when is the best time to have this? Well, you know your children best. But we place pressure ourselves, perhaps, as the reports about when we are ready as an individual, as a couple, to therefore hold this space and create a flexibility in that conversation. I think, like you just touched upon.
Yeah. I think again, so preparing yourself. So for some people, it can be reading around the subject. Maybe it's not the sick parent. And if they're in a co-parenting situation, then maybe it's the well parent that does a little bit. But to learn about other children and families where they've gone through that same experience and how their children have coped with what tools or communication strategies or whatever they've used can sometimes really help those parents to sort of think about those conversations. I mean, we know that children cope way better if they are told the truth. They will always know something's up, and they often will make that up or worry. You don't have to say all of it as well. So if you're finding it really difficult to tell the whole truth, don't lie, but maybe start off with a little bit of information and then be childlike. Sometimes your children will really surprise you in what they want to know and what they don't want to know. I think it's finding yourself to be in a situation where you're able to have those conversations. And sometimes that is understanding that your children will be better off if they do have those conversations. Sometimes when parents are reluctant, sometimes it's easier to approach it from what are they observing in their children behavior wise, because they will know that their behavior has changed. So sometimes that can be a trigger, and often they will put the dots together. They were like, oh, they've suddenly become really anxious, or they suddenly are refusing to go to school. They know something's up. So they know, you kind of know, oh, this is the right time to start having conversations, really. But it's also about not doing it on their own and not being alone with the whole big conversations, because this is, as you say, the worst conversations you will ever have with your children.
I think it's important for us to make a distinction as well, what those conversations will look like in a co-parenting scenario and what they'll look like in a single parent scenario, or perhaps where there's the shared guardianship we've always talked about, making sure that you're both on the same wavelength and you're both agreeing what the parameters of that conversation are. Obviously, in a single parent situation, it's different. You have ownership yourself. But something that comes up is this idea that to try not to expect that child to give you a really clear indication that they've taken on board the news. Don't be worried that the child might literally look at you and just say, great, thanks. Can I go and, back to playing with my Lego now? And you hear the feedback from parents. Oh, does that mean they've heard it? Have they taken it in, or is it just bounced off? Do I need to keep revisiting the same conversation? And then randomly, when we talk about best times, randomly in 2 or 3 weeks later, you'll be sitting at the table having lunch with the grandparents. All of a sudden, the child will pop out and say, "So, mummy, when are you going to die?" And there's that moment of, "Oh my God, hang on, this is really inappropriate time." And their instinct is to shush the child down and say, "Oh no, can't talk about that now, especially not with grandma and granddad around." And actually, it's almost the encouragement is to embrace it and say, "That's a really good question. Actually, do you know what? Once we finish dinner, we're going to sit down over there. We're going to talk about this, and we'll get, I don't know, a visual aid in, which I'm going to come on to a little bit more in a minute about Fruitfly." Embrace the conversations. I think that's the beauty of what you've been doing at Fruitfly now for quite some time, is how do we want to have those conversations? How do we embrace them?
Yeah. And children are naturally curious about everything to do with cancer, especially the younger ones. The older ones have learned that perhaps we don't talk about it so much, and that we shouldn't talk about it. But if you are role modeling that actually we are talking about and everything's on the table and we can talk about it, then that's beautiful, because then actually they will just sort of begin to think it's a sort of more of a normalized kind of thing that we can talk about. They might be hard, difficult conversations, but actually there's that honesty there and that good connection between the parents and the children. And I think it's often when, especially little children, when they ask those questions at those random times, and it sort of surprises you, and it's like actually you're interpreting or you're projecting onto them that they shouldn't know about, or it is an inappropriate time. But as you say, if you've already prepared something in your head for when those questions come popping at you, to say that is brilliant. That's a great question. We can answer that when we get home because I'd really like that more time with you or that visual aid or whatever. Some families use like a kind of a box or a notebook. And so they put all the questions on there. So sometimes if everyone's busy or it's chaotic or really, really stressful or whatever, when the child will think of a question rather than then thinking, oh, I know I can't really say this to mum or dad yet because, whatever's going on. But what I'm going to do is write it down, put it in the box, or I'm going to write it on the pad. And I know, after dinner, this box is always opened. The questions are open. So they always know that that's kind of space is there for them, really.
It's almost like junior journaling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that to do as well, and that can be really good because again, everyone's learning. It's a new situation. It's new, and to make sure that it's not just about practicalities. It's about emotions. It's about feelings and everything like that. They're very egocentric. That's what they are. So actually, sometimes you have to literally put them in the parents' shoes, and once they get, then they grow this development in terms of empathy. Kids stop getting frustrated because mum or dad couldn't do this anymore. They had that understanding. So I think bringing that earlier on in the cancer education is a really important part of helping a family.
And we hear it in cancer circles about if you go into an appointment, take somebody with you so they can take notes.
Yeah.
And it's making sure you don't forget those questions and queries and those thoughts that come up. And it's almost like, we just need to transfer that to the whole environment as well, not just a clinical setting, but we have these questions and queries that come up all the time.
Definitely. Some parents often get really confused and maybe hurt and maybe worried, really, if children don't ask questions, that they just sort of like. And so for little ones, sometimes it's about they haven't understood it, or you might need to say it in a different way, a different format, or just like gently, repeat it every now and again. But for like teenagers, sometimes there is that avoidance. They are not ready to ask those questions. They need that sort of, it's like a protection shield type thing. And often that will go, but they just need that time. And so we often say to parents, if you can give them that space, that's better than keep sort of not nagging, but, trying different ways. Sometimes just let that be. And it can be a great coping mechanism for them in the short term. As long as nothing massive's going to happen, as long as there's a little bit of time, just let them to have that and don't expect them to always have questions. They often will come, but just give them that space.
Well, I suppose, I guess touching on teenagers, how do you pick apart the behavior of a teen from being somebody who is worried and anxious and scared, but reluctant to have a conversation in case they don't feel like mum or dad are wanting to have a conversation because it's confronting for them, versus that teen who is, for want of a better phrase, just being a prepubescent, emotionally fraught, unpredictable teenager and is just pushing boundaries because that's what they would have done anyway, as opposed to, well, this is now happening because cancer has now entered our family. But you are still a family and your nucleus still has to have your own ground rules and your own boundaries. And sadly, just because cancer has entered our family, it does not mean that you can suddenly now do whatever you want. And it's how do you tread the boards carefully, but not so carefully that you walk on eggshells that they take advantage of it.
Yeah. I think generally most parents know that there's something wrong. And if you have that feeling that something's a bit wrong, it probably is. So there's just normal teenage behavior, but sometimes there are those kind of flags that you can see. And often if they are still operating in their normal functional way, that tends to be quite a good sign. But if they start fighting with their mates, falling out a lot, their schoolwork or their school performance, attendance is dropping, then they are kind of flags. So sometimes the chaos is in the family and they will all be pushing those boundaries and doing everything and you still have to be that parent. But sometimes looking outside can be an easier way for a parent to see how their children is coping, especially if children aren't going to speak. But sometimes it's finding those moments, choosing those moments when you can penetrate that barrier. So I had one parent told me how their teenager was just shut up shop. That's it, basically. And then they discovered, I don't know how, but they were in the car and basically the mum who was driving said, I'm going to wind down the windows and we're going to swear out the window. I think the child was 14 and not allowed to curse at home. But during that little short ride, and it was boundaried, it was like we were allowed to swear. And so they wound down their windows and they just said all the, the fantastic, obscenities. And then when the windows came up, that was it, back to being, the normal boundaries and the rules. But it gave them a laugh, which like broke a lot of tension. The child understood that the mum knew that actually the kid needed that and is hard at the moment, and the child understood that, okay, the parent has an understanding. So they might not have that communication, but it was a different form of communication. Do you know what I mean? It was a really healthy connection. So it's finding those weird ways. And also with teens, as you say, they don't often want to burden the parents. So often it's getting across that to the child to begin with, to say that, whatever you want to say to me is never going to be a burden. But also asking them who else would they like to talk to, and giving them permission that they are allowed to do that, because often they don't feel like they can. But if there's some great other adults or aunts or whoever's in the support circle, then giving them permission to go and have a chat with them if they want to.
Seems like as good a point as anyone to talk a little bit more specifically around Fruitfly and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and how you're supporting those conversations through narrative and support in terms of dialogue, but also in terms of actual activities and activity base, the kind of coaching support that's there.
So we kind of do, there's sort of two arms of support really for families. So the first one is the coaching that you've mentioned. So it's an 8-week online intervention, and it's where parents with any experience with cancer can come together and be with each other, which is a really, really important thing. But also to learn different parenting strategies and tools and how they can help navigate their family life, but also to understand children's feelings and the needs behind their behaviors, as well as around self-care and self-compassion, because they have to be, in a good place to support their children, or in the best place that it can be. And also around sort of low energy parenting and that kind of stuff. So that's for any parents. So we have had lots of parents who have stage 4 incurable cancer that have come on. I know 2 parents who were the co-parents, so they didn't have the diagnosis. The other parent had the cancer diagnosis, and they were majority of the time in a hospice. And actually, they made the time because they knew they needed to almost skill up again, or they just wanted to reassurance as well that what they were going to be doing and what they thought was going to be doing is okay. But actually what they also found was a huge support network just from being with other people who got it. So it's a real diverse bunch, and actually that's the beauty within it, because some people who are further along the line of the cancer pathway can really support people who maybe have just started. And equally, if you've got teenagers, to find somebody else with teenagers and to have a chat. So it's a really relaxed kind of environment and a really safe space. So that's free. That's on a termly basis. So you just sign up on the website. It's very easy to get on board with that. And then the second bit is more around resources and trying to support parents to communicate, either cancer education wise or more around looking at different coping skills and looking at different ways to connect. And so maybe legacy work as well, and giving them sort of ideas when you're a parent who is very unwell. It's very hard to think of creatively, especially if you've got low energy. So we do lots of different things where they can dip in and dip out, or they can buy toolkits. They can just go on the website and see loads and loads of different kind of ideas. And in terms of sort of palliative care, parenting in that space, we have a PIPS kit, which is designed for 5 to 10-year-olds to support them and their family when their parent is in palliative care. So it's a physical kit. But also there's an online version which is completely free. So everything's there, but you just don't get these monsters. But we also really like to bring in other fabulous resources that other charities do around the world as well. I've got Ollie here, and this is great. So this is medical play with kids. It's brilliant. So Ollie has a pick line. So it's explaining what's happening. And Ollie you can change the hair, the mane. and it's all for younger kids to help them. Actually, adults quite like them, to help them understand and prepare them for if they are going to be going to visit their parents when they're really, really sick and end of life. It's all about that preparation and using it on their level, being age appropriate. I mean, you could just do one if you've got a crafty person in your wider circle. They could just make one. Do you know what I mean? But these are you can get these in the works, and sometimes this was from Al did, and sometimes you can get a tissue box, and make teeth in the bit where you take the tissues out, put some googly eyes on. That's your worry monster. So you don't have to buy anything. But the idea is that they can stuff their worries and, kids can write them or draw them and put them in. And then what's fabulous about it is, as we've been mentioning throughout this kind of conversation, is that you can't assume what's going on in your kid's head. Sometimes it's bonkers, but actually if they worry, they put down that worry, they can shove it in there. And then at the end of the day or the end of the week, the family or the parent can take out the worries and discuss it with their children. It's a great way of. And also sometimes parents say it's just parking them, just like they're not solving their problems, but it's just freeing up their heads. So sometimes going before school can be a great thing, or before bed. So that's where all the worries bigger and bigger at bedtime. So sometimes just parking them into the morning can be a really useful tool to have.
And with all the parents that you've supported with coaching sessions, what does that look like and feel like for those parents in terms of how more enabled they feel to be able to, create that space and to be able to have that confidence and have those conversations?
Yeah. So it's been such a privilege to be part of it and to witness it. And you can see it as the weeks go on, as they go home and they use certain things that they've learned, or, and often because it's a group dynamic, you get brilliant bits from other parents that have tried this sort of thing that we've never thought of. And so they take that home and they use it. So you can see as the weeks go that they start to communicate a lot better, especially with teenagers, because there are certain strategies to use where you meet them at where they're at. Understanding actually some of the behaviors that their parents are seeing and why that is happening, and then working out with the child, what to put in place. So we can see the confidence in their parenting. It really improves. So we've evaluated it as well, so we can see it in the data. But actually, just being there in the groups and listening to their stories, listen to them come back the next week and go, "Oh my God, this worked," and seeing how something like that can change makes them more confident, thinking, "Oh, I can put something else in place," or "I didn't realize this is what was needed." Or, I mean, the first session we asked the parents. It's not homework, they don't have to do it, but sometimes it's a really good thing, is to just go and ask your kid, what is it like to be a 9-year-old? What is it like to be a 13-year-old today? And don't say anything. And parents come back and they're, oh my God. It's rarely about their illness, the parent's illness. And often it's like, it's all right, actually, it's fine. Whereas the parents thinking, oh my God, I'm ruining my child's life, da, 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 da. So actually that as an opener, a good way of just like what you can do and how you can do it and how easy you can do it. Because when do you get that space to think about your parenting anyway, regardless if you've got, a serious illness? You generally don't, do you? You just become a parent and then it's one foot in front of the other and everyone to function as best as possible. But to have that time where you have, 90 minutes a week where you can sit back and they get a nice little journal and stuff, and reflect on who they are, how they parent, what other things that they could do to really support their children, why their children need support in that way, why there's a real need to understand their children's behaviors in the context of when, things are changing, and different ways to communicate and trial and error. And I think probably the biggest thing is knowing that you're not alone doing this. I think it's a very lonely space to think that you're the only person struggling with this, and to find somebody that's struggling with it. Different cancer type, different prognosis, different family dynamic, but to know that somebody else is just there dealing with all the same stuff in their head. It's really powerful, really supportive. So all the data says great things: improved parenting skills, improved parenting confidence. They said that they kind of were less stressed with their children. They were less stressed with their children's behaviors, all those kind of things. But actually listening to them, and especially when they wrote to us afterwards and told us, what impact it had on them, you could just see, just knowing that they weren't alone and knowing that there is a way forward to parent through this.
I think the user-led nature of the project, I think, is our biggest strength. I think you can theorize all day long, from an academic perspective about this is what the scenario will probably look like. These are likely the factors that you'll have to actually reckon with. And then you've got the reality, and it's anything but in that order, in that, it doesn't fit that size box. That child isn't fitting into that, behavior and response type. And it's like, no, this is why co-design with those that are affected, those that have been affected, those that could be affected, as well as the professional input, is the real beauty of it.
The other great thing about on the course, we talk a lot about rupture and repair, about, you're going to get it wrong. Everyone gets it wrong. There's no perfect parent, but how to repair it. And actually sometimes that repairing, or the strategies around the repairing, is really beautiful. And that's where the connection and the closeness between the parent and the child exists and is cemented more. Parental guilt is just like the biggest thing, really. I think every single parent that comes or we interact with, it's about parental guilt. I mean, you have it anyway, and then when you become sick, kind of thing. So it's actually expressing it, acknowledging that everyone has this parental guilt, and then actually having a little discussion around it is really helpful for parents, because acknowledging it and then maybe thinking of different ways of people, how do they handle that, or looking at what they've done right. And sometimes actually, why don't you have a conversation with your children? How do I parent? And often that is a really lovely kind of activity that is often very enlightening for the parents.
Yeah, it is. I think that guilt aspect, you're doing everything you possibly can because you're not stopping. You're still trying, despite everything you're trying to juggle. You're still trying to, to plug away and to keep some kind of normality and to keep contact. And I think that guilt word, I think it's sometimes about the simplicity of bringing people back to: are you physically present when you don't feel like you are? Are you physically sitting in that space? Are you on that sofa? Are you at the kitchen table, even if you don't feel like you can contribute much? And try and bring the focus back onto, actually, do you know what? Give your physical presence more credit. And granted, obviously that looks very different for different parents. It could be people who aren't physically present, they need to have far more bed rest, or they're not, they're in hospital stays for much longer. But for those conversations where they do revolve around that, we miss what's right in front of our nose, don't we, so often? And just to bring the conversation onto those frontline health professionals for a minute, because obviously everything that we're talking about already is very much about what they can refer patients to and how we can support families once they get referred to us. But more often than not, it's not you, it's not me that ends up, with these individuals at the point of diagnosis. So when you are in the midst of that and you're supporting somebody as a health professional, whether you're a midwife, whether you're a nurse specialist, whether you're a health visitor, it doesn't matter what discipline you are. When you are supporting somebody who is of a much younger age demographic, who has children potentially of various ages, or a newborn, or a 2 or 3 year old, or a teen, what do you think the barriers are for health professionals to know how to navigate that as it unfolds, and so thinking, how do I possibly support the family? Because the conversation with children is inevitably going to be one of their biggest stressors.
Yeah. I think it's fear, isn't it, really? I think it's the same as we're all humans. So it's the same fear that parents have. I think from all the conversations that I've had with nurses, there's that fear that they're going to get it wrong. They're going to suggest the wrong thing. There's no formal training for them around this, that they say that they're winging it, or they feel that they will become too emotional, because it's a very emotional subject, as you said. If they've got children themselves, sometimes, you put yourself in that position of that parent who is dying. So I think there's just a fear around they're going to get it wrong, or they're going to make make a mess of it, basically. So I think that's the main barrier. And then it's often a barrier not knowing that charities exist that can support them. So even if they can't have that conversation, that they know that they can signpost to somewhere where those conversations can be had. So I think there's that barrier of just, the lack of connections and knowing that what's out there, really. And I think as well as that, and the lack of education for them, there's nothing, is there? It's nothing that other than us trying to plug in the gaps, but there's no training for them to be able to say, right, these are the now conversations that you might be having. This is one way you can do it. And so I think there's all that fear tied up to just thinking either avoid it or wait for somebody else to step in or to offload it to somebody else within the team. So we get that a lot in terms of, like, sometimes we have worked with family therapists that are in hospice, for example, and they say that doctors or whoever, consultants, just call them down constantly when that conversation doesn't have to require someone that with that expertise at all. Just needs to be a very simple conversation, but there is that fear that they don't quite know what to say, so let's get the experts in. But as we all know, there's not many of those experts, and they often aren't in the spaces that we need them to be in. And so many conversations I've had where people have done it and they felt like they have done it really badly, and it's stayed with them. This was years ago that they had those conversations, but it's those memories that they have because they feel like they didn't do as well as they did. And also in that profession, it's very much a helping profession, isn't it? It's like that solutions kind of like, but actually you can't, there is no solution. The children are going to be really, really hurt because it's really painful thing that's going to happen. And you can't get away from that. But there is lots of things that you can support them with, so they can go through that grief, they can get through it. I think also the other barriers are, when's the right time? Where's the space? If it's going to be in a busy hospice or wherever, that's going to be challenging. So all those mixture of things, really.
What would you say that, imagining that you are the health professional sat in that room that day and that news is unfolded, that family have received that news that sadly this cancer is no longer curable, I guess what would be the best advice to that health professional as to, the family say to you, how am I going to have this conversation with my children? I can't, my biggest fear, I can deal with this myself. My biggest fear is going home and explaining this to the kids. If you had a takeaway message for a health professional of any discipline, I mean, it's very likely to be a CNS in that situation, more than likely, but it could be, if they were in a pregnancy setting, it could be a midwife that they end up in that situation with as well. Is what would be your kind of, I suppose, take home for them to say if that unfolds?
My advice would be that the children need to know what's going on. They need you to be honest with them, and to do it when you are ready, and to do it at their pace, depending on their age. My advice would be to prepare what you're going to do, and have in place those tools that we've been talking about, like the worry boxes or whatever, or not even that, maybe just start having those conversations. My advice would be to know that it doesn't break children. So it doesn't break children at all, and that your child already knows something is happening. So they're better when you have started to talk to them. And that's all they need to really say. I mean, there's loads of other things that they can do practically. They can have things that they can show, which often helps a healthcare professional have those conversations. If they're holding something, a leaflet or whatever, or, a little card with your details on or whatever. Sometimes that process of giving them something and saying, you need to have those conversations with your children now. We know from evidence that there are better outcomes if they are involved. You don't have to be on your own to do this. There's a way that you can be supported in doing this. But it's for the age of the child, but also like the circumstances and what's happening. But it's just to ensure that those conversations are going to be had, and I suppose the other thing would be make sure that they know that it's nothing that they have done wrong. Just children feel blame, they feel guilty all the time, and parents often don't see that because they don't think that they're going to have that. So that would be probably the first thing, would be make sure that your children don't think it's anything. They haven't caused anything. They haven't done it. Even teenagers often think that as well. And especially if they're dying, they think, oh, I could have done something different, or I could have been like this, or I could have done that. And that can be really destructive. So those two key things, it's really, really encourage you to talk to your children and tell them what's happening, because they will fare better with that. And also that make sure that they know that's nothing that they have done. And then also invite them in. It's depending what, again, the situation, but to be open to make sure that they can come into the space if they can, if it's not, intensive care or whatever. But to make sure that the family knows that this is something that they can do and something that can be really helpful for a lot of children. And yeah, I think there are lots of different things in terms of when that hospital visit or that hospice visit happens, what they can do and how they can support that, and how they can make that whole situation and that visit really good for the child, a really good experience. But I think the key message is just always communication and signposting, isn't it, really?
If I can. The other things as well is, I think, to encourage any health professionals out there that signposting to other people is not a get out or a dodge for you doing your own role. In fact, signposting somebody adequately to an organization that is going to help them shows that you've done your research, that you are aware of what's out there, that you want to get somebody in touch with the right people as quickly as possible so that they don't feel on their own. I think sometimes when we talk about signposting as a general way of support, I think it gets undersold. It's like it's a dodge. It's just somebody handed a leaflet and going, I can't help you. I'm not trained in this. Therefore, you best go and contact them. And actually, some of the best advice as well can be having prior research, becoming more aware of what's out there in the world, so that when you do come across somebody in that situation, you can very quickly go, you know what, guys, there is a charity specifically for that situation. And we know, just like that reduced of isolation, that peer support, the strength of it. And all of a sudden, that midwife, that nurse, that oncologist, whoever it is, handing them that leaflet, I think they really underestimate the power in that gesture. And I think you just phrased it beautifully, is actually almost giving somebody something, handing something over. It carries a lot more than the best way we can describe it in simple words sometimes. So I think being well researched, being aware, wanting to know about the different scenarios. I refer to it as meaningful signposting. And somebody said to me once, well, what's unmeaningful signposting? To me, it's just, you best contact them, but not really knowing what the person is going to receive when they make that call, as opposed to going, get in touch with these guys. I know them. We trust them. We've had patients supported by these guys before. They're a really good bet. We know they'll look after you. And knowing the landscape of who you're signposting people to as well.
And being specific, I suppose, like you just said, we know that the research shows that if you give a parent a whole load of places that they can go, it's just too overwhelming. So they're not likely to refer themselves to anything. So being that really targeted, this particular space will go here. And potentially, if they have that relationship, follow up to be like the next time they see them, did you manage to have a chat, or did you manage to get in contact, or did you manage to go and see the website?
Do you want me to do that referral for you as well? Sometimes takes a bit of weight and pressure off that thing. It's something else I've got to fill out.
Definitely. I mean, we've had some nurses fill in our self-referral coaching program on behalf of their patients. So I think you're right. I like that meaningful signposting. I think it's important, isn't it?